Welcome to GovCon Unscripted, where we dive into the unfiltered stories and strategies from all around the world of government contracting. Join host Chelsea Meggett as she explores how to navigate, thrive, and win in this complex but lucrative industry.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to GovCon Unscripted. I'm your host, Chelsea Meggett, CEO of Collaborative Compositions. And today I've got with us Christine Hopkins, CEO, President of ASCII. Christine, who are you and what do you do?
I am the President and CEO of ASCII. And what I do is I operate both our commercial entity and our federal entity. And what we do is manage people's stuff. So we buy stuff, we move stuff, we store stuff, we inventory stuff, we get rid of stuff. All aspects of the supply chain with the exception of physical transportation.
Interesting. And you mentioned before we started recording that you had just gotten into federal contracting during the pandemic, right?
Yes.
So what brought you into that?
Yeah, so we started in 1999 to specifically operate for BP. That was our first contract. And we ran their entire supply chain on the North Slope of Alaska up until they left in 2021. So we had originally 10 owners, and one of those owners was a publicly traded company. So we didn't count as small. And then when COVID hit, it really hit the small businesses in the oil and gas industry the hardest. We were on the brink of going under. We had a good cash position. I was one of the minority owners at the time and one of only two working owners. And I went to the rest of them, had a conversation, took the company through a partial liquidation. So they took their piece of the money and walked away. And we survived on 2 PPP loans. And in the process, I asked myself, now that we count as small and we restructured as a woman-owned small business, what other industry is heavily regulated, lots of red tape, low margins, lots of competition? Federal government.
Lo and behold.
They also have a lot of stuff. So we took our commercial experience and started our journey into federal contracting. And it was really a race against time. I knew that we could land business and turn things around. Could we do it before we ran out of money, which is the big thing in federal contracting or any kind of contracting. Yeah. So March of 2020 is when we started the conversations. March of 2021, we had completed the restructure and started actually down that path. We won our first contract as a prime contractor in November of 22. Wow. Started generating revenue from that contract in February of 23. It was a long startup. And then won our second federal contract and the one that kind of pushed us into profitability in April of 24.
Wow, congratulations. That's quite the timeline for government contracting.
Yeah. Yes.
So were you familiar with federal contracting at all before you decided to dip your toes into it?
Yeah, I had worked for a few ANCs over the course of my career. I also grew up as an Air Force brat and married into the Army. My husband since retired. So I understood kind of the DoD world and then had done some on the federal contracting side of things. So it didn't scare me as far as the terminology and the process.
How much overlap did you find that there was between oil and gas and federal contracting?
Surprisingly a lot. While the things are different, on the oil and gas side, you're dealing with multi-million-dollar turbines or downhole chemicals. But the federal government also has regulated parts and materials and chemicals, and the stuff has different names, but it's still stuff. And you still have to deal with spec sheets and making sure that you're handling it correctly.
Interesting. Now, you're based in Alaska, right?
We are.
So did you find that it was hard to get out into the federal market, being based in somewhere that's rather remote for that type of interaction?
Yes, absolutely. One, it's expensive to go anywhere from Alaska, and both time and money. So one of the things that worked in my favor is that this all happened during COVID. So a lot of the industry days were remote, and a lot of conferences had remote options where they were live streaming or broadcasting. So I strategically went to 3 or 4 things a year so that I could still build those relationships, but I was able to maintain them through remote interactions. So yes, it's very hard to get into this kind of thing from Alaska because there's only so much work here and I can't
Right.
just drive to the next state.
Sure. I imagine that getting started was probably full of speed bumps and hiccups. What were some that you noticed that were a little bit more of a learning lesson than some of the others?
A lot of things. So probably the hardest thing when you're getting started is figuring out what are legitimate resources and what are not legitimate resources. As soon as you list yourself on SAM.gov, you are just flooded
Oh, yeah.
with everything, phone calls, emails, and then they figure out your naming convention and everybody in your company is getting emails. It's pretty crazy. And we did some things right and we did some things wrong. I had a couple of situations where I got caught in some scams, spent some money that didn't need to be spent. And there's a few really good podcasts out there. There's not that many GovCon podcasts. You can go through and figure who's been on the air for years and who's being listened to. But there's a few podcasts that I would binge listen to get information. And then there's those that I listen to that are more just informative. And then there are your Apex Accelerator is an amazing resource depending on which state you're in and what your small business status is. There's women's business centers, there's veterans business outreach centers. I tapped into everything I could that was free because we didn't have any money.
Hey, that's the first step, right? Using
Yes.
those free resources to the fullest extent possible, because
Yes.
that's what they're there for. But you mentioned that you got flooded right after you registered in SAM.gov. And I think not enough people really recognize that SAM.gov's a publicly available database. And you don't have to have a registration to go in and find all of the people that are registered, but it just generally puts you out there in ways that you might not necessarily be aware of when you're actually registering. Can you talk to us a little bit about some of those scams that you were inundated with and some of the things that you got coming through via email?
Yeah. So most of the email scams that I got, I didn't get caught up in any, but the email scams that I would see are, we will manage your SAM registration for you. And I'm like, I just finished it.
Yeah, it's not expiring, you wouldn't think.
And it's free and it's relatively easy. But I get them, hey, you're expiring, let us help you. Or, hey, there's this new thing, we can manage your small business profile for you. All that stuff's free and it doesn't take a ton of time. And if you don't know how to do it, that's what those free resources are for. There's a lot of, hey, let us get you on the GSA schedule. There's a lot of those. Not everybody needs a GSA schedule.
Do you have one?
And we do not. Eventually, we will get one because our services are on the schedule. But to me, it doesn't make any sense to have a schedule unless you have customers to sell to.
Exactly. Interesting. So that sounds a lot of pushing and prodding into paid direction when not necessarily needed.
Oh, yeah. Even today, I probably get 10 to 15 junk emails a day that are trying to get me to buy services or finance me. And those are sketchy.
Yeah, I'd say so. So which ones did you find that you did get caught up in? Which ones were more alluring than the basic SAM brokers?
So the ones I did, there were 2 that I got caught up in. And honestly, I think they're wrapped into legitimate services. And so it was a little easier to get scammed. So one of them was, they were both actually tied to the same conference group, which I think is leadership. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. I've burned it out of my memory.
Probably for good reason.
But there's a group that does some small business conferences. And I'd gone to a few of the conferences and they're pretty good. If you're not brand new, they're me. But if you're brand new, they're pretty good. And they had offered, this would have been a few years ago, probably 2 or 3 at this point. And they had offered contracting guides based on the NDAA. Right, the National Defense Authorization Act. Sure. They were like, oh, we're going to publish what the purchasing priorities are for each of the branches of service. And it seemed reasonable. It was like $120 or something for each of these guides. And I thought that's relatively inexpensive and I wouldn't have to read it myself.
Yeah.
I bought them, never received them. I don't think they ever intended to publish them. So that was unfortunate. And then at one of those conferences, there was somebody who was like, hey, if you need to get your foot in the door, there's this resource. And that was absolutely a scam. So it was one of those, you pay me a fee and I'll go find you work. So we paid a fee, never got anything out of it. And I'd signed a contract, so then I was stuck. And after a couple of months, I thought, now I don't want work from this person because it was a percent of the total revenue awarded for the contract. And I was like, yeah, now I don't want the work.
I'm stuck paying them commission.
Because I didn't know when I was getting in.
Sure.
What I know now is you can't pay somebody to give you work.
Yeah.
Some of the best advice I got in that process was when I was complaining to my dad, who was in federal contracting for years. I was complaining to him about that. And he said, there's really two ways to get started in a business. You can hire somebody that brings with them the relationships, and that costs money. Or you can build the relationships yourself, and that costs time. One way or another, you're spending.
Yeah.
He said the risk of hiring somebody is they leave and they take those relationships with them. So if you have the time, spend the time and build your own relationships.
Definitely. I'll get you work. Just give me a little bit of low to no fee, and then I'll get you work, and then you'll just pay me off of that work. You'll give me some sort of commission. So what was the appeal in that and for you?
Yeah, for me, it was, and it wasn't a low fee for sure. There was a higher fee and then a commission on top of that. And it was introduction. So it was somebody that seemed very well connected and they were going to facilitate introductions and help find me a mentor is ultimately what I was looking for, to get into a mentor protege type relationship. And there were a couple of good contacts that came out of that. Nothing that has resulted in any long-term work, actually no work at all. But that's what I was paying for, was I was paying for those connections to build those relationships. And I learned pretty quickly that wasn't fruitful or productive or a very good use of money. I would have been better served to spend that money on a business consultant.
Yeah. And I find oftentimes that folks coming into this realm, they don't really realize that there are very strict rules, in fact, against making commissions off of government contracts. I think probably specifically for that reason, that they don't want to have folks that may have relationships end up biasing an acquisition. And I basically bought the contract, so you just have to now pay me off of that contract, because ultimately, when it comes down to it, it's supposed to be fair and open competition, and it's supposed to be relatively transparent and have some rules and regulations associated with it that prevent that sort of bias from seeping in and prevent that sort of commission-based sale from seeping in. So I think it's really interesting that there's still folks out there that just make their way on selling things, trying to commission sale government contracts.
Yeah, and they're doing it by preying on people that don't know any better. I didn't know any better. I was brand new. I was in my first probably 6 months. I just didn't know what I didn't know. And this was one of the things that I didn't know. And so my advice now, whenever I talk to people who are entering, is don't spend any money until you talk to an Apex Accelerator or one of the free resources out there, or pay a good quality business consultant and talk to one of these free resources on who a good one is.
Absolutely. And those free resources, again, they're paid by our tax dollars. So put it to work for you, right? If you're going to put money into it by way of paying for it with your tax dollars, you might as well leverage it to the fullest extent. So what are some of the red flags that, looking back on, that you might have missed?
As far as like jumping into these scams, honestly, if it's too good to be true, I was like, oh, that sounds easy. Nothing about government contracting is easy. So if it sounds like it's easy, it's a scam.
Yeah, the word easy should probably never be associated with anything in the realm of government contracting, because it's based on a regulation that's 2,000 plus pages long. The FAR is very in-depth and very detailed, and it's not meant to be easy. If it was, everybody'd be doing it.
Yeah, I think the only thing related to the word easy would be if you're paying for something, a GovTribe or a GovWin or a Capture to Propose, and
Right.
it just scours those websites for you. And what you're doing is not easy per se. Those are very complicated systems and processes and websites to
Right.
navigate. You're paying somebody to do it for you. It's still not easy.
Yeah. And those tools absolutely have their place, right? Taking anything that you can off of SAM.gov and culminating it with things from FPDS or USA Spending, all of those resources. If you can get it all in one place, like on one of these tools, that definitely makes it easier. But by no means is any of it easy at the end of the day.
And as a matter of fact, if you're new and you're looking at resources like that, go to your Apex Accelerator. They have one that's free. There's bid matching services out there that are free. They're not as fancy, but you don't need fancy when you're at the beginning. You can't afford to pay for these things.
You don't walk in with GovWin money.
No, there's some sweat equity involved.
Absolutely. So what do you feel, or how do you feel like these sort of getting into some of these scams held you back?
Honestly, the one where I spent the money on the introductions, that's money that I could have spent on a legitimate business consultant that could have helped propel me forward faster. It's money that I could have spent on travel or on business development or in other spaces. So I would say held me back by about 6 months in my growth and development. That's 6 months worth of money that I could have put somewhere else.
Right. And that's a lot of time in government contracting. It's 6 months they think is not necessarily the most time, but that's a lot of time that could have been better spent elsewhere.
Yeah. And when you're talking about payroll dollars and things like that, it's a long time.
That's a long time to go on with nothing coming out of it and no ROI seen. Absolutely can be a massive hindrance and a roadblock for companies, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was a very expensive lesson learned.
I'm glad it didn't discourage you, though, from government contracting, and it didn't totally put you off on things that you may have just gone and decided that this isn't for you. You might have just decided that was the one thing that burned you and you weren't going to look back. So I'm glad that you decided to stick with it and stay in the government contracting realm. And it sounds like you've come pretty far since then. I hear that you recently won an award.
I did, which is very exciting. So I won the 2025 Small Business Person of the Year for the state of Alaska.
Wow, congratulations.
Thank you. And that puts me in the running with all of the other state and territory winners. One of us will win the national award. So it's very exciting. And I didn't self-nominate, which is what makes it even more exciting, is somebody else nominated us. I was nominated by the Alaska Women's Business Center. And then when I was talking with them about what makes or breaks the winner in this particular award, they told me that it was resilience in the face of adversity and the ability to come through the other end positively.
Wow, that's fantastic. That's huge congratulations. And that's a fantastic award.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. And like I said, extra exciting to not self-nominate.
Not have to put yourself in that hat to be pulled. So that Women's Business Center, that's another free resource, right?
It is a free resource. Most states have one. I don't think all do, but it's funded by the SBA, and it is a free resource center, or free resource to small business owners, entrepreneurs. They target women, but it's not exclusive to women.
Interesting. So you can go in there if you've just got a small business that you might need some help with. You may not be a woman owner.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they have a few male clients that aren't veterans that they help. I guess what sets them apart, why it's called a women's business center, is one of the things that they focus on is financing underfunded businesses. And that's a huge struggle for women in particular, is getting financing. So they focus on working with banks that are friendly to female entrepreneurs.
Oh, I love that. That's fantastic. That's probably a lesser known resource than the Apex accelerators that folks out there should absolutely be leveraging. How do you feel like they were most helpful in your growth and development?
For me, honestly, Alaska didn't get a women's business center until I was about a year into this process.
Oh, wow.
So it was something I wish had existed when I started. And so I have gone to them as a client, but I'm also on their advisory board to help advocate for them and help other people understand that this is a resource. And then I'm available to answer any government contracting type questions that they might have for their government contracting clients, because the majority of their clients aren't actually in the federal contracting space. They're entrepreneurs, single type business. Some are trying to enter federal contracting, but some aren't. Some are running textile businesses, or they're doing coffee carts, or they're doing art, or they're doing whatever it is that they're doing as a single person tax prep.
So I think a lot of people don't really think about that, but you don't have to be a federal contractor to leverage these free resources.
No, you don't. Apex accelerators are designed specifically for federal contracting, but the other ones that are SBA funded are not. So your small business development centers, there's one in every state. These women's business centers, veterans business outreach centers, you don't have to be in federal contracting to leverage those.
So if you're paying tax dollars, I mean, even if
Yes.
you're not, you should probably be leveraging these free resources, because that's
Yes.
what they're there for you. And they're trusted. They're not advocating for those pay for your SAM registration type companies. They really have some valuable resources for folks out there that are newer to this and don't necessarily have the experience, right?
Yeah, the SBA has a really cool program, and this is available in every state, called Thrive. I can't remember exactly what it stands for. I graduated from it, but it's called Thrive. And it is an executive education program, and it takes you through 6 months or so, and it takes you through every aspect of a business, HR, accounting, legal, all of the pieces of running a business, which if you're in federal contracting and you're brand new and you're just starting a business, it can help you with everything you need to know to help with your pricing.
Oh, wow. That's a huge thing in federal contracting, is making sure you have your pricing right.
Yeah, and they don't focus on teaching you federal pricing, but it helps you understand all of the ratios and cash flow and all the things you need to know if your pricing is right.
Oh man, and that's a really tricky one for a lot of folks coming into this. Commercial pricing doesn't necessarily just translate over to federal pricing one to one. It's not quite the same in a lot of cases. So having that resource available to go to and ask those questions, that's absolutely invaluable. So what's next for ASCII?
We're continuing to grow. So one of the interesting things that I have done internally is I don't want to grow too fast. So while we could go after more work, I don't want to win more than 1 or 2 decent sized contracts a year, because when you're new in the market, reputation is all you have, right? You don't have a lot of CPARs to go on. You just have your reputation. So I want to make sure that whatever we're standing up is 100% in our swim lane so that we can perform it well and effectively. And I don't want to take on more than I have time to build relationships with.
And are your other owners involved in helping build the relationships? Are they out there and being as active as you are?
No. So my working owner business partner is our IT person, and he is getting ready to semi-retire, has no interest in taking over being part of running the business. He just sits in his swim lane. And then my other business partner is my husband, who doesn't work for the company.
Oh, that's great. And having those resources on your side is fantastic. But it sounds like you're absolutely the champion for the company.
I try to be.
And it sounds like you've got a good strategy there. A lot of folks come into this and they really just want to win as much as they can, as fast as they can, and they don't really worry about performance on the front end. It's an afterthought, if you will. And you brought up a great point. When you get into this, and especially in federal government contracting, because it's a pretty small world, people talk to each other, people know their other contractors. You burn bridges if you fail to perform. That's going to travel pretty fast. So having those relationships intact and making sure that you're able to perform on the work that you win, that's key in this business, I'd say.
It is. And we're seeing some of that play out in the conversations that we're having and our ability to win other works. We're coming in a close second in the stuff that we're not winning. When we do our debriefs, we just got to make it over that next hump. But we're on track as far as slow growth. So I really err on the side of overdoing it when it comes to meeting customers' expectations. We're not a do the bare minimum kind of contractor. So I want to make sure that I have the time and dedication to help work with the on-site leadership to bring them into that culture.
Really building those solid relationships that carry
Yes.
through and that help you get those great CPARs and that help you get build that great reputation and those relationships within the market.
Yeah, it's all about trust. If you're going to unseat an incumbent, the devil you know is always better than the devil. So you want to be a trusted resource when they start doing research on you or they start reaching out to your references. They need to be solid.
Yeah, absolutely, especially within government contracting. How has the current administration, has their priorities, has any of the chaos impacted your business yet?
Yes, positively and negatively. So we have one contract where we own the inventory and then we resell it to the government. That's the first one that we got that took a long time to stand up. So we basically run a distribution center for GSA. So it's a contract versus a schedule, and it's an OCONUS contract. It sits here in Alaska. So there were a lot of environmental things put on that contract. We had to do an annual report on how we were mitigating climate change. We had to have special insurance. There were some triggers in there on greenhouse gas emissions reporting that were going to require corporate greenhouse gas emissions reporting, not just for that contract. So it had a little bit of a longer reach. And we just hit the trigger with the second contract we got. I would have had to April 1st do a greenhouse gas emissions report. And I was panicking because the second contract we won is with the Fleet Readiness Center at Cherry Point, and we move aircraft parts. And I'm like, how do I capture greenhouse gas emissions operating government equipment? I had no idea how I was going to capture it across the company. That was removed from the contract because of some of these executive orders. So that was positive because I was in a panic. One, how I was going to do it. Two, how I was going to pay a resource to do it for me. I can see that requirement on large contractors that are maybe doing manufacturing or their own thing, but for a small business that has a co-working space office and everything else is client operations, I don't even know. That's too much. So that was a positive. And then on the negative side, we have 4 ISO certifications. So we have safety, quality, environmental, and then we have one in diversity and inclusion. And our diversity and inclusion is around, interestingly, our hiring practices are around military spouses and veterans, our diversity goals. People think diversity and they think color or gender, and it doesn't have to be, it just means different.
Well, to be fair, definitions.
So our diversity practices are around making sure that we can support our customers. And right now our biggest customer is the DoD, military spouses and veterans. And having been a military spouse and my husband and dad are both veterans, that's a personal passion of mine. Anyways, we operate a single management system for all of them. And one of our contracts requires ISO certification and quality. And so that management system was attached to that contract. So I got a last minute notice from the contracting officer that I could tell was panicking and said, hey, I need you to pull out all references to diversity and inclusion, all of it, so that we don't have to worry about your contract being in jeopardy. And I had a day and a half to go through hundreds of documents and scrub, not just references to that certification, but if I used the word inclusion, for example, in an unrelated manner, I had to use a different word. So the most ironic to me about that is I was in DC being inducted into the Military Spouse Employment Partnership Program.
Oh my gosh.
When I got that notice, and I was like, pulled it all out.
Oh, man, and that timeline too, that's unbelievable. I'm sure you had your thesaurus out and looking for things other words that you could utilize instead. And ultimately, has it impacted your hiring practices or have you stopped hiring veterans?
No, we just use different words. Now we're military friendly instead of having diversity goals. We have military friendly goals.
Because of that.
Yeah, it hasn't changed what we do or who we are at all. We just call it different things now.
I love that. I think even though it's negative, you still turned it into a positive for overall outcomes. So I think that's absolutely incredible. And I'm shocked that they imposed those greenhouse gas reporting requirements on such a
I
small
know.
business. That's really
I know.
surprising.
It's crazy. When I first saw it, I was like, I don't even know what to do with this. And I just ignored it.
Yeah.
And then when we hit the financial trigger, I had a little bit of a panic attack and then it was removed. So I guess it all worked out at the end.
Now, was that removed via some sort of long contract modification process, or was that just an email as well?
No, it was a contract modification in all of them. With our Navy contract, the one with the ISO certification, I think they were being proactive to make sure that we weren't triggering any funding issues.
Sure.
Because it's a critical contract. So once we cleaned that up, there was a contract mod to replace the document and then do a conformance to basically remove all history of that. And then for our GSA contract, there was a contract mod to remove these reporting requirements. And then there was a second contract mod to remove a bunch of FAR clauses.
Wow. And that was probably just within the last 90 days, huh?
Yep. All of that was within the last 90 days.
Have you ever seen the government move that fast?
No, I have not. And it's interesting because in talking to other people who are federal contractors, they're all freaking out. And, you know, what I've been telling them is if all you do is react, you're going to drive yourself crazy and you're going to spin your wheels and you might even go under in the process, right? You need to be strategic about it, look at where the government's going and what the strategy behind, which is hard to determine right now, but you try to look at the strategy behind what they're doing and then focus your efforts around that. If I look at our business, the government's not suddenly going to stop having stuff.
Believe it or not, they're not just getting rid of everything.
They're not going to get rid of everything. And they're reducing the size of government. So in reality, the work that they're doing isn't going to go away. They're still going to have stuff. They're still going to have to move stuff. What it does mean for me is there may be more work.
Exactly. And that's the positive attitude that I've been pushing, and my optimism for this entire administration so far has been any reduction in government force is going to mean an increase in contractor force. So it's an increase in contractor requirements means more business for government contractors in the end.
Let's be real. I'm not paying a government pension. Right?
Yep.
It's cheaper for me to do it than it is for them to do it.
That's very true. The overhead goes down when you hire contractors. And I think that's a key point to look at, and not just necessarily looking at it as all negative and all doom and gloom, but looking at it on the other side as an opportunity. You've got an incredible story here, Christine. I really love to hear these success stories that folks have had, especially coming out of the pandemic. It's one of the toughest times, and folks would probably argue that we're in another one of those tough times, but being able to see the optimism and see the positives on the other side is absolutely key. And I thank you so much for sharing your stories of some of those scams that you walked into, because those are so common. People just come into them all the time and they trip and fall. And sometimes it does burn them bad enough to decide to not even participate anymore. And we lose government contractors that way all the time. So really appreciate you sharing those lessons learned. How can people get a hold of you if they want to know more, if they want to work with ASCII?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn. So it's ASCII Family of Companies. If you're looking on any of the social media, we have two taxable entities. Advanced Supply Chain International is the commercial side, and then ASCII Federal is the federal side, and we operate as an affiliated entity. So I'm on LinkedIn. You could look at our website, which is www.ascillc.com. Any of those places. Or Christine Hopkins on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and you share some awesome information, and you're always sharing updates on how ASCII's doing and how you're doing, and I love following and seeing that. Congratulations again on your award, and I really hope that you're in the top of the running for that national.
Thank you. Me too.
Thank you so much. We'll have folks reach out if they can and when they can, and we'll have to have you back on the show when you've made more progress and won a couple more contracts down the road.
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. This has been great. I appreciate having the time to talk to you.
Absolutely.
Thanks for listening to this episode of GovCon Unscripted with your host, Chelsea Meggett. Do you have a GovCon story or need guidance in government contracting? Connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn to be a guest on the show or to enhance your business strategy. Don't forget, your network is your net worth. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with your growing GovCon community.